the bullet that shattered the window of the general store in Yuma, Arizona territory, missed Hannah Everett's head by no more than 3 inches. And in that moment, as glass rained down around her like deadly snow, she understood that running from her past had brought her nowhere safe at all. It was June of 1881, and the heat outside pressed against the wooden buildings like a physical force, but Hannah felt cold to her bones. She dropped to the floor behind the counter, her hands shaking so violently she could barely press them against the rough planks beneath her. The store owner, Mr. Patterson, had stepped out only minutes before to help a rancher load supplies, leaving Hannah alone to mind the shop. She had been working there for just 3 weeks, ever since arriving in Yuma with nothing but a worn carpetbag and enough money for 2 nights at the boarding house. Another shot rang out, this one splintering the doorframe, and Hannah heard shouting from outside. Male voices, angry and determined. She recognized one of them, and that recognition sent ice through her veins. They had found her. After 6 months of running, of changing her name from Hannah Ellis to Hannah Everett, of taking stage coaches to remote towns and working whatever jobs she could find, they had finally tracked her down. "We know you're in there, girl." The voice belonged to Wade Morris, her stepfather's hired gun. "Come on out peaceful-like, and maybe we won't burn the whole place down with you in it." Hannah pressed herself smaller against the floor, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Her blue cotton dress, already dusty from the morning's work, scraped against the wood as she tried to think of a way out. The back door was 15 feet away, but she would have to cross an open space to reach it. The front entrance was impossible. The small window in the storage room might work, but it faced the alley where Morris's men had probably positioned themselves. She was trapped, and they knew it. Outside, she heard the sound of boots on the wooden walkway, multiple sets moving with purpose. Hannah closed her eyes, thinking of her mother's grave back in Missouri, thinking of the documents hidden in the lining of her carpetbag at the boarding house, the documents that proved her stepfather had forged her mother's will, stealing everything that should have been Hannah's. She had been 17 when her mother died, barely more than a child, and her stepfather had wasted no time in trying to marry her off to his business partner, a man of 45 with a reputation for cruelty. Hannah had refused, had threatened to go to the law with what she knew, and that was when the threats had turned deadly. Now she was 18, alone in a strange town, about to die in a general store that smelled of coffee beans and leather. The door burst open with a crash that made Hannah bite back a scream. She could see boots, 3 pairs of them, moving through the store. One set stopped near the counter, and she heard the distinctive sound of a gun hammer being pulled back. "Come on out, Miss Ellis. Your stepfather sent us to bring you home. He's willing to forget all this nonsense if you just come peaceful." Hannah's voice, when she found it, came out as barely a whisper. "I'm not going back." But the words were swallowed by the blood pounding in her ears, too quiet for anyone to hear. "Check behind the counter," Wade Morris ordered, and Hannah heard footsteps approaching her position. That was when the new voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk, calm and measured and edged with something dangerous. "I would suggest you gentlemen leave that girl alone and walk out of here while you still can." Hannah risked lifting her head just enough to see past the edge of the counter. A man stood in the doorway, backlit by the harsh Arizona sun, so that for a moment he seemed like a dark angel framed in light. He was tall, lean in the way of men who spent their lives on horseback, wearing dusty trail clothes and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. What she could see showed a strong jaw, weathered skin, and eyes that were the color of storm clouds. A gun hung at his hip, his hand resting easy near it with the casual confidence of someone who knew exactly how to use it. "This ain't your concern, stranger," Wade Morris said, turning to face the newcomer. Morris was a thick man with a scarred face and mean eyes, his gun already drawn. His two companions, both wiry and nervous-looking, spread out slightly, their hands hovering near their weapons. "Well, I'm making it my concern," the stranger said, stepping fully into the store. "Name's Kade Emerson. I scout for the army sometimes, do some bounty work when the money's right. And I know for a fact that there are no wanted posters out on any young woman matching this girl's description, which means you boys are either lawmen with paperwork, or you're something else entirely." "She's wanted by her family," Morris growled. "That makes it legal enough." "Not in the Arizona territory, it doesn't." Kade Emerson moved further into the store, his movements fluid and sure. "Now, I'm going to say this one more time. Walk away. There's no need for blood today." Morris's face darkened. "There's 3 of us and 1 of you." "I can count just fine," Kade said, and something in his tone made the 2 hired guns exchange nervous glances. "Question is, can you? Because even if you manage to shoot me, which I doubt, at least 2 of you are going to hell right alongside me. Maybe all 3 if I'm feeling particularly motivated. So which one of you wants to die first?" The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Hannah, still pressed against the floor, found herself unable to look away from Kade Emerson. There was something about the way he stood, completely relaxed yet coiled with potential violence, that reminded her of the mountain cats she had heard about, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. One of Morris's men broke first, taking a half step back. "Wade, maybe we should think about this. We can come back later when—" "Shut up," Morris snapped, but his grip on his gun had shifted, becoming less certain. He stared at Kade for a long moment, clearly trying to calculate his chances. Whatever he saw in the cowboy's gray eyes must not have been encouraging, because he finally lowered his weapon slightly. "This isn't over. That girl's got something that belongs to her family, and we aim to get it back. Then you can talk to the territorial marshal about it," Kade said. "Until then, I suggest you mount up and ride out." Morris gestured to his men, and they began backing toward the door. At the threshold, Morris turned back, his gaze finding Hannah where she huddled behind the counter. "Your stepfather's a patient man, girl, but his patience has limits. You can't run forever." Then they were gone, their boots thundering down the wooden walkway outside. Hannah stayed frozen in place, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She heard horses neighing, then the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. "They're gone," Kade Emerson said gently. "You can come out now, miss." But Hannah couldn't move. Her muscles had locked up, adrenaline and terror holding her captive more effectively than any rope. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate, and a sob escaped her throat before she could stop it. Kade crossed to the counter, his boots appearing in her limited field of vision. He crouched down, putting himself at her level, and when she finally managed to look up at him, she found his face surprisingly kind beneath the shadow of his hat. "Easy now," he said softly. "Take a breath. You're safe." Hannah started, but her voice shook so badly she could barely form the words. "I cannot. They found me. They actually found me. I thought I was careful. I thought—" "Look at me," Kade said, and something in his steady tone made her focus on his face. Up close, she could see he was probably in his mid-20s, with a scar along his left cheekbone and eyes that had seen too much but somehow remained gentle. "You're breathing too fast. Slow it down or you're going to pass out. Match my breathing, all right. In and out, nice and steady." Hannah tried to follow his instruction, watching as he exaggerated his own breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth. Gradually, slowly, the panic began to recede enough for her to think clearly. She became aware that she was sitting on a dirty floor, that her hair had come loose from its pins, that this stranger had just saved her life. "That's better," Kade said, offering her a slight smile. "Think you can stand?" Hannah nodded, not trusting her voice. Kade held out his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she took it. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and strong, and he pulled her up with an ease that spoke of considerable strength despite his lean build. Once she was on her feet, he released her hand and stepped back, giving her space. "Thank you," Hannah managed, her voice still trembling. "If you hadn't, they would have. Don't think about what might have happened," Kade said. "Think about what did happen, which is that you're standing here safe and sound. Those men are halfway to the county line by now, I'd wager, though they might be back once they work up their nerve again." The thought made Hannah's brief moment of relief evaporate. "They'll come back. My stepfather won't stop. He can't afford to let me," she cut herself off, suddenly aware that she was about to spill her entire story to a complete stranger. Kade studied her face for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "You want to tell me what this is really about? Might help to talk to someone who's not trying to shoot you." Hannah looked away, focusing on the shattered window where the afternoon sun streamed through in dusty beams. "I wouldn't even know where to start." "Start with your name," Kade suggested. "Your real name." "Hannah Ellis," she said, then winced. "Though I've been going by Hannah Everett since I left Missouri." "Well, Miss Ellis, seems to me you're in a considerable amount of trouble. Those men weren't just hired muscle. They had the look of professionals, the kind who don't give up easy." Kade walked to the window and peered out, checking the street. "Where are you staying?" "The boarding house down the street, Mrs. Cooper's place." "Good. That's run by a tough old bird who doesn't take nonsense from anyone." He turned back to face her. "Here's what's going to happen. We're going to walk down there together. You're going to pack your things, and then you're going to tell me the whole story. After that, we'll figure out what to do next." "I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm offering." Kade adjusted his hat, his expression firm but not unkind. "I've got no tolerance for men who threaten women, especially 3 armed men against 1 unarmed girl. So let's go before your friend, Mr. Patterson, comes back and finds his store shot up." Hannah glanced around at the broken window and splintered doorframe, guilt washing through her. "I should leave money for the damages. I have a little saved. We'll sort that out later. Right now, I want you somewhere safer than here." Kade gestured toward the door. "After you, Miss Ellis." Hannah's legs still felt unsteady as she walked toward the door, but she forced herself to move. Kade followed close behind, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. She didn't know this man, had no reason to trust him beyond the fact that he had intervened when he could have easily walked away. But something in his manner, in the quiet confidence of his voice, made her feel marginally safer than she had in months. The street outside was busy with the afternoon activity of a territorial town. Wagons rolled past, their wheels kicking up dust. Men stood outside the saloon, talking and smoking. A woman in a calico dress herded 2 children toward the mercantile. Everything looked so normal that Hannah felt disoriented, as though the violence of a few minutes ago had happened in a different world entirely. Kade kept pace beside her, his hand resting near his gun, his eyes constantly scanning the street and buildings around them. "Those men say anything specific before I showed up. They said my stepfather sent them, that he wanted me to come home." Hannah's voice sounded hollow to her own ears. "But it's not a home. It never was, not after my mother died." "When was that?" "Almost a year ago, October of 1880. The words felt like stones in her mouth. "She was sick for a long time before that, consumption. By the end, she barely recognized me." They reached Mrs. Cooper's boarding house, a two-story structure with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows that seemed cheerfully out of place in the desert town. Mrs. Cooper herself was sweeping the front steps, a stout woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Hannah," she exclaimed, setting aside her broom. "What's happened? You look like you've seen a ghost." "There was trouble at the store," Kade said before Hannah could answer. "Some men came looking for Miss Ellis here. She's not hurt, but I think it would be best if she gathered her belongings. She may need to move on from Yuma for a spell." Mrs. Cooper's eyes narrowed as she looked between them. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that involves guns and threats," Kade said evenly. "The kind that might come back around if we're not careful." "Well, we can't have that, Mrs." Cooper turned to Hannah, her expression softening. "You go on up and pack, dear. Take your time, Mr. Emerson, Kade Emerson." "Mr. Emerson can wait in the parlor." Mrs. Cooper gave Kade a long, assessing look. "You're not the one bringing trouble, are you?" "No, madam. Just trying to prevent it. See that you do." Mrs. Cooper shooed Hannah toward the door. "Go on, child, and don't you worry. I've got my late husband's shotgun behind the desk, and I know how to use it." Hannah climbed the stairs to her small room on the second floor, her mind racing. Pack and go where? She had been running for 6 months already, working odd jobs in half a dozen towns, always looking over her shoulder, always afraid. Morris finding her in Yuma meant her stepfather knew her general location, which meant nowhere in the territory was truly safe. Her room was simple but clean, containing a narrow bed, a washstand, a small wardrobe, and a single window that looked out over the back alley. Hannah pulled her carpetbag from under the bed and began methodically packing her few possessions. 2 dresses besides the one she wore, a nightgown, undergarments, a hairbrush, the leather-bound journal her mother had given her for her 16th birthday, a tintype photograph of her parents on their wedding day, her mother young and beautiful, her father handsome and proud. He had died when Hannah was 12, thrown from a horse, and her mother had remarried 2 years later, a decision that had eventually destroyed everything. Hannah ran her fingers along the lining of the carpetbag until she found the carefully concealed opening. The documents were still there, thin sheets of paper that represented the only proof of her stepfather's crimes. Her mother's real will, the one that left everything to Hannah. The forged will that left everything to Jonathan Ellis, the man who had married into wealth and then murdered his way into keeping it. Hannah had no proof of the murder itself, but she had seen her stepfather's face the day before her mother died, had heard him arguing with the doctor about dosages and treatments. She had suspected then, and the forged will had confirmed her suspicions. She tucked the documents back into their hiding place and finished packing. The entire process took less than 10 minutes. Her whole life, reduced to one worn bag. Downstairs, she found Kade standing by the front window, watching the street. He turned as she descended, taking in her carpetbag with a nod. "That everything?" "I travel light," Hannah said. "I've gotten good at it." Mrs. Cooper emerged from the kitchen with a cloth-wrapped bundle. "I packed you some bread and cheese for the road. And Mr. Emerson, you take care of this girl, you hear me? She's a good worker and a sweet soul, and she doesn't deserve whatever trouble's chasing her." "I'll do my best, madam," Kade said, accepting the bundle with a grateful nod. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Kade led Hannah down the street to the livery stable, where a magnificent buckskin horse stood in one of the stalls, watching them with intelligent dark eyes. "That's Scout," Kade said, stroking the horse's neck with obvious affection. "Ornery as they come, but he's gotten me out of more scrapes than I can count." "Where are we going?" Hannah asked, finally voicing the question that had been building since they left the boarding house. "There's a ranch about 15 miles north of here. Belongs to a friend of mine, man named Daniel Kershaw. He owes me a favor or three, and he's got enough men working for him that your stepfather's hired guns wouldn't dare try anything there." Kade began saddling Scout with efficient movements. "We'll hole up there while we figure out a more permanent solution to your problem." "I can't ask you to do this," Hannah said, the words tumbling out. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Why would you help a stranger?" Kade paused in his work, his hands resting on the saddle. When he looked at her, his gray eyes were serious. "My sister was about your age when her husband started beating on her. She ran, ended up in a town where nobody would help her because he was wealthy and influential, and she was just some frightened girl with bruises she tried to hide. By the time I found out where she was dead. Fell down the stairs," her husband said, "but I knew better. Couldn't prove it, though, not in any way the law would recognize." Hannah felt her throat tighten. "I'm so sorry. So am I, every day." Kade went back to adjusting the saddle. "But I learned something from losing Sarah. I learned that sometimes the only thing standing between a person and evil is one other person willing to say no, to draw a line, to help when it's not convenient or safe or smart. So that's what I'm doing. I'm saying no to whatever your stepfather thinks he can do, and I'm helping you. It's as simple as that." It wasn't simple at all, but Hannah found she couldn't argue with him. Instead, she said, "Thank you, Mr. Emerson. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Call me Kade. And you can repay me by staying alive and free, which is what my sister didn't get to do." He finished with the saddle and led Scout out of the stall. "Now, you ever ridden a horse before?" "A few times with my father when I was younger." "Good enough. Scout can carry both of us, though he won't be happy about it. Ranch is a few hours' ride, and I want to get there before dark." Kade swung up into the saddle with practiced grace, then extended his hand down to Hannah. "Put your foot in the stirrup and I'll pull you up behind me." Hannah hesitated for just a moment, looking up at this stranger who had become her unlikely protector. Then she took his hand, felt his strong grip close around hers, and let him pull her up behind him on the horse. She settled onto Scout's back, acutely aware of how close she was to Kade, her arms instinctively going around his waist to steady herself. "Hold on tight," Kade said. "Scout likes to run, and these desert trails can be rough." Then they were moving, leaving the town of Yuma behind in a cloud of dust. Hannah risked one look back at the place that had almost been her grave, then focused forward, toward whatever uncertain future awaited her at the Kershaw Ranch. They rode in silence for the first hour, following a trail that wound through rocky hills dotted with sagebrush and ancient saguaro cacti standing like sentinels in the fading light. The heat of the day was giving way to the cooler temperatures of evening, and Hannah found herself grateful for the warmth of Kade's body in front of her, solid and reassuring. Finally, as the trail leveled out across a stretch of open desert, Kade spoke. "So, are you going to tell me the whole story, or do I have to guess?" Hannah took a breath, feeling the words pressing against her chest like a physical weight. "My mother married Jonathan Ellis 3 years after my father died. He seemed kind at first, attentive to her, polite to me. He had money from his businesses in St. Louis, import and export, though I never understood exactly what he did. My mother was lonely and still grieving, and he said all the right things. But he wasn't kind," Kade said, not a question. "Not once the ring was on her finger. He was controlling. He wanted to know where we went, who we spoke to. He moved us to his house, which was far from town, isolated. My mother made excuses for him at first, but I could see her getting smaller, quieter. Then she got sick." Hannah paused, remembering those terrible months, watching her mother waste away. "The doctor said it was consumption, and maybe it was at first. but toward the end, she got worse so quickly. I heard Jonathan arguing with Dr. Phillips about the medicine, about increasing the dosages of her pain medication. The doctor refused, said it was too dangerous. A week later, my mother was dead. "You think he killed her," Kade said. "I know he did. I can't prove it, but I know." Hannah's voice hardened. And then came the will reading. The lawyer read a document that left everything to Jonathan with just a small allowance for me until I married. But I had seen my mother's real will, Kade. She showed it to me when she first got sick. She left everything to me with Jonathan as trustee until I turned 21. That's not what the lawyer read. He forged a new will. Yes. I didn't say anything at first because I was in shock, grieving. But then Jonathan started talking about how I should marry his business partner, Charles Hammond. He's 45 years old, Kade, and he has a reputation for being cruel to women. Jonathan said it would be good for me to have a husband to look after me, that Charles would provide well for me. But I knew the truth. Charles owed Jonathan money, a lot of it, and I was to be payment for the debt. Kade's back tensed beneath her arms. "So you ran." I found my mother's real will in Jonathan's study, hidden in a lockbox. I took it and left in the middle of the night with what little money I had saved. I took a stagecoach to Kansas City, then another to Denver, then down through New Mexico territory to Arizona. I changed my name, worked whatever jobs I could find. I thought I was being careful, but somehow they found me anyway. "Men like your stepfather have resources," Kade said. "He probably hired Pinkerton detectives or something similar to track you. The fact that Morris and his boys caught up to you in Yuma means they've been following your trail for a while." "So what do I do?" Hannah asked, and she hated the desperation she heard in her own voice. "I can't run forever. I can't prove Jonathan killed my mother. Even with the real will, who's going to believe me over him? He has money, influence, friends in the government. I'm just a girl who ran away from home." "You're more than that," Kade said firmly. "You're someone who refused to be sold like property. Someone who risked everything to escape a bad situation. That takes courage, Hannah, real courage." "I don't feel courageous," Hannah admitted. Her voice shook despite her efforts to steady it. "I feel terrified all the time. I jump at shadows. I can't sleep most nights. And today, when those men came into the store, I couldn't even move. I just froze like a scared rabbit." Her voice shook with fear as she continued. "Some courage, that is." Kade was quiet for a moment, and then he said something that would echo in Hannah's heart for years to come. "You're braver than you know. Courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about being afraid and doing what needs to be done anyway. You've been running and surviving for 6 months with killers on your trail. You've been working and building a new life in each place, even knowing you might have to leave at any moment. That's not the action of a coward, Hannah. That's the action of a survivor." Hannah felt tears prick at her eyes, though she blinked them back. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "I know you well enough," Kade said. "I've seen men with guns and badges who had less spine than you showed today. You're stronger than you think, and before this is done, you're going to have to be stronger still. But here's the thing, you don't have to do it alone anymore. I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere until this is resolved." The simple certainty in his voice made something shift in Hannah's chest, a tiny loosening of the constant knot of fear she had carried for so long. She didn't know why this stranger had decided to champion her cause, didn't fully understand the depths of guilt and grief that drove him, but she found herself believing him, trusting him in a way she hadn't trusted anyone since her mother's death. "Thank you," she said softly, and tightened her hold around his waist as Scout carried them across the darkening desert. They reached the Kershaw Ranch just as the last light was fading from the sky. It was a sprawling operation, with a large main house, several outbuildings and corrals that held dozens of horses. Lanterns glowed in windows, and Hannah could see men moving around, finishing the day's work. Kade guided Scout toward the main house, where a tall man stood on the porch, watching their approach. He was older than Kade, maybe 35, with a thick beard and the weathered look of someone who spent his life working the land. "Kade Emerson," the man called out, his voice carrying easily across the yard. "Haven't seen you in 6 months. Figured you were dead in a ditch somewhere." "Not yet, Daniel," Kade said, swinging down from Scout and then helping Hannah dismount. "Though it's not for lack of trying, I need a favor." "Course you do. Nobody ever visits just to visit." But Daniel Kershaw was grinning as he came down the porch steps, his hand extended. He and Kade clasped forearms in the manner of old friends. "Who's the lady?" "This is Hannah Ellis. She's got some trouble following her, the kind with guns and bad intentions. I was hoping you might have room for her here for a spell, somewhere she can be safe while we figure out a more permanent solution." Daniel's expression sobered. "What kind of trouble?" Kade gave him a quick summary of the situation, leaving out the more personal details but making clear the danger Hannah faced. As he spoke, Daniel's face grew progressively grimmer. "Hired guns going after a young woman," Daniel said when Kade finished. "That's low, even for this territory." "Course you can stay, Miss Ellis. Got a spare room in the house, and enough hands around here that anyone trying to cause trouble will think twice." He paused, studying Hannah with kind eyes. "You look like you could use a hot meal and a safe bed. My wife Martha will get you settled." "She's inside with the kids." "Thank you, Mr. Kershaw," Hannah said. "I don't want to impose, no imposition. Any friend of Kade's is welcome here, and any woman needing help is doubly welcome." Daniel gestured toward the house. "Come on, let's get you two inside and fed before you collapse." Martha Kershaw turned out to be a warm, practical woman with laugh lines around her eyes and flour on her apron. She took one look at Hannah's pale, exhausted face and immediately took charge, shepherding her to a small guest room off the kitchen and providing fresh water for washing. By the time Hannah emerged, feeling marginally more human, dinner was on the table. It was a noisy, chaotic meal. The Kershaws had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, ranging in age from 5 to 10, and they filled the house with chatter and laughter. Hannah found herself relaxing despite her circumstances, drawn in by the warmth of this family that had welcomed a stranger without hesitation. After dinner, while Martha got the children ready for bed, Kade, Daniel, and Hannah sat on the porch in the cooling night air. Above them, the stars were coming out in spectacular profusion, unmarred by the lights of any city. "So what's the plan?" Daniel asked, lighting a pipe. "Can't imagine you're just going to let those men keep hunting Miss Ellis here." "The documents she has could prove her case," Kade said. "The real will versus the forged one. But she needs a judge who will listen to her, and more importantly, she needs to stay alive long enough to get her case heard." "There's a territorial judge in Prescott," Daniel said. "Man named Harrison. He's fair, doesn't take bribes, and he's got no love for men who abuse their power. If you can get to him with the evidence, he might be able to help." "Prescott's a long way from here," Kade said. "And Morris and his men will be looking for us on the roads." "So don't take the roads," Daniel suggested. "Cut across country. It'll be harder going, but harder to track too. I can lend you a couple of horses, supplies for a week's journey. You can skirt around the settlements, come at Prescott from the northeast. Won't be comfortable, but it'll be safer than the stage." Hannah listened to them discuss her future, feeling oddly detached. These 2 men, relative strangers to her, were planning a dangerous journey to help her seek justice. It seemed surreal, like something from one of the dime novels her mother had forbidden her to read. "What if we can't reach the judge?" she asked quietly. "What if Jonathan has somehow gotten to him? Or what if he doesn't believe me?" "Then we find another way," Kade said, turning to look at her. In the lantern light, his face was all planes and shadows, but his eyes were steady. "I told you, Hannah, you're not alone in this anymore. We'll keep trying until we find a solution that works." "Why?" The question burst from her before she could stop it. "I understand you lost your sister, and I'm truly sorry for that. But this isn't your fight. You could get killed helping me. Why would you risk that?" Kade was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the star-filled sky. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and raw with old pain. "Because I failed Sarah. I was off scouting for the army when she needed me most. I got her letters too late, arrived in her town 3 days after her funeral. Her husband was still walking around free, accepted by the community, while my sister was in the ground. I wanted to kill him. I actually had my gun drawn, was about to do it when the local marshal stopped me, said it wouldn't bring Sarah back, would just make me a murderer." He looked back at Hannah, and she saw the weight of grief and guilt in his eyes. The marshal was right, but that didn't make it hurt less. "I've spent the last 2 years wishing I could go back and make different choices, be there when Sarah needed someone to protect her. I can't do that, but I can be here for you. I can draw that line I was talking about and say no to men who think they can terrorize a young woman because she dares to want freedom. So that's why, Hannah. I'm helping you because I need to know that Sarah's death meant something, that her story can have a different ending when it's played out again through you." Hannah felt tears sliding down her cheeks, hot and unexpected. She made no move to wipe them away. "I don't know if I can be worth all this," she whispered. "I'm just one person, just a girl who doesn't matter to anyone." "You matter," Kade said fiercely. "Don't ever think you don't. Every person matters, every life has value, and what your stepfather is trying to do to you is wrong. That makes it worth fighting for." Daniel cleared his throat, breaking the heavy moment. "Well, on that note, I think we should all get some rest. Sounds like you've got a hard journey ahead of you, and it'll go easier if you start fresh. Miss Ellis, Martha made up the guest room for you. Kade, you know where the bunkhouse is?" "Actually," Kade said, "I think I'll sleep on the porch tonight, just in case Morris and his men are stupid enough to try tracking us here in the dark." Hannah wanted to protest that he didn't need to stand guard, that he should get proper rest, but the words died in her throat. The truth was that knowing he would be nearby made her feel safer than she had in months. So instead she just nodded and said goodnight, retreating to the small guest room that smelled of lavender and clean linens. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds of the ranch, thinking about everything that had happened that day. Just that morning, she had been a girl working in a store, trying to build some semblance of a normal life. Now she was on the run again, but this time she wasn't alone. Kade Emerson had entered her life like a force of nature, and she didn't know what to make of him. He was handsome, she could admit that, with his storm-gray eyes and quiet competence. But more than that, he was kind in a bone-deep way that had nothing to do with expecting anything in return. He looked at her and saw someone worth saving, worth protecting, and Hannah hadn't felt that way since her mother died. It was dangerous to let herself depend on him, dangerous to start feeling things for a man she barely knew. But lying there in the darkness, listening to the creak of the porch boards as Kade settled in for his watch, Hannah couldn't help the small flutter of warmth in her chest. She finally drifted off to sleep with his words echoing in her mind. "You're braver than you know." Hannah woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon, sunlight streaming through the window of the guest room. For a moment she was disoriented, unsure where she was, but then memory flooded back and she sat up quickly. The room was empty, her carpetbag sitting where she had left it by the door. She could hear voices from the kitchen, Martha's light tones mixed with deeper male rumbles. She dressed quickly in her other good dress, a gray calico that was a bit worn but clean, and tried to tame her dark blonde hair into something respectable. When she emerged from the guest room, she found the Kershaw family already at breakfast along with Kade, who looked like he hadn't slept at all despite his night on the porch. "Good morning," Martha said brightly. "Sit down, dear. You need a good breakfast before you head out. Head out." Hannah looked between Martha and Kade. "We're leaving today, soon as possible," Kade said. "I've been thinking about what Daniel said last night, and he's right. The longer we wait, the more time Morris has to regroup and come after us. Better to move now while we have the advantage of surprise." Hannah felt her stomach clench with nerves, but she nodded and took a seat at the table. Martha heaped her plate with eggs and bacon and fresh bread, far more food than Hannah could imagine eating, but she forced herself to try. She would need her strength for whatever lay ahead. After breakfast, Daniel took them out to the barn where he had prepared 2 horses for the journey. One was a sturdy bay mare with gentle eyes, the other a rangy paint gelding that danced sideways as Daniel led him out. "The mare's name is Rosie," Daniel said, handing Hannah the reins. "She's steady and sure-footed, won't spook easy. The paint's called Patch. He's got some spirit, but Kade can handle him." Kade was already loading supplies onto the horses, saddlebags filled with food, canteens of water, blankets rolled and tied behind the saddles. He worked with economical efficiency, checking every strap and buckle twice. Martha appeared with a cloth-wrapped bundle which she tucked into one of the saddlebags. "Extra food for the trail," she said. Then she turned to Hannah, taking both of the younger woman's hands in hers. "You be careful out there, and don't let fear make your decisions for you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is trust someone else to help carry your burdens." "Thank you," Hannah said, her voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For welcoming a stranger, for the food and shelter, for not asking too many questions." "We all need help sometimes," Martha said simply. "And Kade's a good man. You're in safe hands." The 3 Kershaw children came running from the house, wanting to say goodbye to the horses. Hannah found herself smiling at their enthusiasm, at the simple joy they took in the world around them. This was what a family should be, she thought. Love and laughter and safety. Kade swung up onto Patch, settling easily into the saddle. "We should go. We've got a lot of ground to cover before nightfall." Hannah let Daniel help her mount Rosie, grateful for the mare's patient stillness as she found her seat. It had been years since she had ridden, and her body felt awkward and uncertain in the saddle. "You'll get the hang of it again," Kade assured her. "Just stay relaxed and let Rosie do the work. She knows what she's doing." They said their final goodbyes and rode out of the yard, heading north into the wilderness. Hannah looked back once to see the Kershaw family waving from the porch, Martha with one arm around her daughter, Daniel with his hand raised in farewell. Then they crested a small rise, and the ranch disappeared behind them, leaving only the vast emptiness of the Arizona landscape stretching in every direction. The first day of riding was harder than Hannah had anticipated. Her muscles, unused to so much time in the saddle, began to ache after just a few hours. The sun beat down mercilessly despite the early June date, and the landscape seemed to shimmer with heat. But Kade set a steady pace, not too fast but relentless, pausing only to water the horses and take brief rests in whatever shade they could find. He was patient with her inexperience, offering quiet suggestions about her posture, about how to move with the horse rather than against it. As the day wore on, Hannah found herself settling into a rhythm, her body remembering skills she had learned as a child riding with her father. They spoke little during the day, both focused on the journey and on watching for any sign of pursuit. But that evening, as they made camp in a small canyon where a trickle of water ran over smooth stones, Kade became more talkative. "You did well today," he said as he built a small fire. "Better than some men I've ridden with who claim to be experienced horsemen." "I feel like one large bruise," Hannah admitted, easing herself down onto a flat rock near the fire. Every muscle in her body protested the movement. "That'll get better in a day or two. Your body will adjust." Kade set a battered coffee pot over the flames, then sat back on his heels. "We made good distance today. If we keep this pace, we should reach Prescott in about 5 days. 5 days, Hannah repeated, trying to imagine 5 more days of riding through this harsh wilderness. "What happens when we get there?" "We find Judge Harrison, present your evidence and petition for a hearing. If he agrees to hear your case, he can issue an order for your stepfather's arrest, at least until the matter is settled in court. And if he doesn't agree," Kade was quiet for a moment, staring into the growing flames. "Then we come up with another plan. Maybe go to the federal marshal or head to California where your stepfather's reach might not extend. There are always options, Hannah. We just have to be smart enough to see them." Hannah pulled her knees up to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. The night was coming on quickly, the temperature dropping as the sun disappeared below the horizon. She could see the first stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "Can I ask you something?" she said after a while. "Ask away." "When you talked about your sister last night, you said you almost shot her husband. What stopped you, I mean, besides the marshal?" Kade poured coffee into 2 tin cups, handing one to Hannah before answering. "Honestly, I saw my sister's face in my mind. Sarah was always the gentle one, the one who believed in doing things the right way, following the law. She would have been heartbroken if I had become a killer for her sake. So I put my gun away and I walked out of that town, and I've spent every day since wondering if I made the right choice." "Do you think you did?" "I think there's no right answer to that question," Kade said quietly. "I let him go and he's still out there, probably hurting other women. But if I had killed him, I'd be in prison or on the run, unable to help anyone. So maybe the real right answer is that sometimes life doesn't give you good choices, just less bad ones." Hannah sipped her coffee, finding it strong and bitter but warming. "I don't want anyone to die because of me. Not you, not anyone else. I know. But sometimes protecting the innocent means standing up to the wicked, and that can get messy." Kade met her eyes across the fire. "I won't lie to you, Hannah. Before this is done, there might be violence. Your stepfather has already shown he's willing to use hired guns. If we back him into a corner, he might escalate. But I'll do everything in my power to keep you safe and to end this without unnecessary bloodshed." "Everything keeps happening so fast," Hannah said, her voice wavering. "Yesterday morning I was just working in a store. Now I'm riding across the desert with a man I barely know, running from killers, trying to reach a judge who might not even help me. How did my life become this?" Kade stood and moved around the fire to sit beside her on the rock, close enough that she could feel his warmth but not so close as to make her uncomfortable. "Your life became this the moment your stepfather decided his greed mattered more than your well-being. None of this is your fault, Hannah. You're not responsible for his choices or for the situation those choices created. You're only responsible for how you respond, and so far, you've responded with courage and integrity. That's something to be proud of." "I don't feel proud. I feel scared and exhausted and completely overwhelmed." "That's normal. You're allowed to feel all of that." Kade's voice was gentle. "But feeling scared doesn't make you a coward. It makes you human." Hannah turned to look at him, studying his profile in the firelight. He was staring into the flames, his expression distant, and she wondered what memories he was seeing there. "What will you do after this is over?" she asked. "After you've helped me, I mean. Will you go back to scouting for the army?" "I don't know," Kade admitted. "I've been drifting for 2 years now, ever since Sarah died. Taking jobs, moving on, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. It's not much of a life. Don't you want more than that? A home, a family?" "I used to, before." Kade finally looked at her, and the sadness in his eyes made her chest ache. "But wanting something and believing you deserve it are two different things. I failed the person I loved most in the world. Hard to imagine building a future after that." "Your sister wouldn't want you to punish yourself forever," Hannah said softly. "If she loved you, and I'm sure she did, she'd want you to be happy." "Maybe," Kade said, "but knowing what someone would want and being able to give it to yourself are also two different things." He stood abruptly, as though uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. "We should get some rest. I want to be riding again by first light." He moved to where the bedrolls were laid out on the other side of the fire, putting physical distance between them. Hannah watched him go, feeling like she had somehow overstepped, though she wasn't sure how. She finished her coffee in silence, then retreated to her own bedroll, lying awake and listening to the sounds of the desert night. The next 3 days followed a similar pattern. They rode from dawn until dusk, stopping only briefly for rest and water. The landscape changed gradually, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills covered in scrub oak and juniper. They saw no sign of Morris or his men, though Kade remained constantly vigilant, his hand never far from his gun. Hannah's body adjusted to the long hours in the saddle, the initial soreness giving way to a different kind of tired, bone-deep, but manageable. She found herself growing more confident on Rosie, learning to read the mare's signals, to anticipate her movements. It was a small thing, but it gave her a sense of accomplishment that had been missing from her life for a long time. As they rode, Kade began to open up more, sharing stories from his years as an Army scout. He told her about tracking Apache through the mountains, about narrow escapes and harsh winters, and the strange beauty of the wilderness when experienced from horseback. His voice when he spoke of these things held a passion that was absent when he talked about other subjects, and Hannah realized that, despite his grief, Kade loved this life, the freedom and challenge of it. She shared stories too, talking about her childhood with her real father, the man who had died too young and left her mother vulnerable. She told Kade about learning to read from her mother's books, about summer picnics and winter snowfalls in Missouri, about the life that had been stolen from her when Jonathan Ellis entered their home. On the fourth night, they camped beside a small stream in a grove of cottonwood trees. The setting was almost idyllic, the water burbling over rocks, birds singing in the branches above. Kade caught fish for their dinner, and they roasted them over the fire along with some of Martha's bread. "Tomorrow we should reach the outskirts of Prescott," Kade said as they ate. "We'll approach cautiously, make sure Morris hasn't somehow gotten ahead of us. If the way is clear, we'll go straight to Judge Harrison's office." Hannah nodded, her stomach fluttering with nervousness. "What do I say to him? How do I convince him to help me?" "You tell him the truth. Show him the documents. Let him see who you are, an honest young woman trying to claim what's rightfully hers." Kade paused. "But Hannah, you need to understand something. Even if the judge agrees to help, even if he issues an order for your stepfather's arrest, this won't be over quickly. Legal matters take time. Your stepfather will hire lawyers, will fight the case. You might be looking at months or even years before it's fully resolved." "I know," Hannah said quietly. "But at least if there's a legal order, he can't just send hired guns after me anymore. At least I'll have some protection." "That's the hope," Kade agreed. They fell silent, finishing their meal. Hannah was acutely aware that their journey together was nearly over. Once they reached Prescott and met with the judge, Kade would have fulfilled his promise to help her. He would be free to go back to his drifting life, to leave her behind and move on to whatever came next. The thought made her chest tighten with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. Over the past 4 days, she had grown accustomed to his presence, to the quiet strength he exuded, to the way he looked at her like she mattered. More than that, she had begun to care for him, to want to know more about him, to imagine a future where their time together didn't end. But that was foolish. Kade had made it clear he was helping her because of guilt over his sister, not because of any personal feeling toward Hannah herself. Once his self-imposed mission was complete, he would leave, and she would have to learn to stand on her own. "Kade," she said suddenly, the words coming out before she could second-guess them. "After tomorrow, after we meet with the judge, what happens to us? I mean, will you stay in Prescott or will you go?" Kade looked up from the fire, his gray eyes unreadable. "I haven't thought that far ahead." "Oh," Hannah said, trying to hide her disappointment. "Of course. You have your own life to live. I shouldn't expect you to keep following me around." "That's not what I meant," Kade said, frowning. "I meant that I've been focused on getting you to safety, on making sure you have a chance to fight for justice. Beyond that, I don't know. A lot depends on what Judge Harrison says, on what comes next. But you don't owe me anything beyond tomorrow," Hannah pressed. "You've already done more than anyone could expect. If you want to leave after we meet with the judge, I'll understand." Kade stood abruptly, pacing to the edge of the firelight. When he spoke, his voice was rough with some emotion Hannah couldn't identify. "Is that what you want, for me to leave?" "No," Hannah admitted, the honesty of it shocking her. "But what I want doesn't matter. You have your own life, your own path. I can't ask you to keep derailing it for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," Kade said, turning to face her. In the firelight, his face was all sharp angles and shadows. "These past days, riding together, talking, I've come to know you, Hannah. You're brave and stubborn and kind, and you've been dealt a terrible hand, but you're still fighting. That's not nothing." "Then what is it?" Hannah asked, standing to face him across the fire. "What am I to you, Kade?" He was quiet for a long moment, the only sound the crackling of the fire and the whisper of wind through the cottonwood branches. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know. I didn't expect this, didn't expect to feel anything but the need to help you the way I couldn't help Sarah. But somewhere between Yuma and here, something changed. You're not just a responsibility anymore, not just someone I'm protecting out of guilt." "Then what?" Hannah asked again, her heart pounding. "I don't know," Kade said again, and there was frustration in his voice now. "I'm not good at this, at feelings and words and figuring out what's happening in my own head. All I know is that the thought of riding away from you after tomorrow makes me feel empty in a way I wasn't expecting." Hannah moved around the fire, closing the distance between them. She was close enough now to see the conflict in his eyes, the way his jaw clenched as he fought some internal battle. "I don't want you to go," she said quietly. "I know that's selfish of me, that you've already given up so much to help me, but I don't want you to go." "Hannah," Kade said, and her name on his lips sounded like a prayer and a curse all at once. "You have to understand. I'm not the kind of man who stays. I'm broken in ways I don't know how to fix. I've got nothing to offer you but more danger and uncertainty." "I'm not asking you to offer me anything," Hannah said. "I'm just asking you to stay. To see this through wherever it leads, not out of guilt or responsibility, but because you want to." Kade reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted, and cupped her face in his rough, calloused hand. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "If I stay, it won't be easy. Your stepfather won't give up, and getting justice might take a long time. There will be danger, hardship. Are you sure that's what you want? I'm sure I want you, Hannah whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Then, emboldened by her own honesty, she said it again, louder. I want you, Kade Emerson. I want you to stay. I want to see where this goes, this thing between us that neither of us expected. For a moment, Kade just stared at her, his gray eyes searching her face. Then, slowly, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative, as though he was afraid she might break. His lips were warm and slightly chapped from days in the sun, and the kiss tasted of coffee and wood smoke and possibility. Hannah kissed him back, her hands coming up to rest against his chest, feeling the steady thump of his heart beneath her palms. The kiss deepened, becoming more confident, and Hannah felt something inside her unfurl like a flower opening to the sun. This was what she had been missing, this connection, this sense of belonging to someone who saw her truly and chose her anyway. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Kade rested his forehead against hers. I can't promise you an easy road, he said quietly. I don't want an easy road, Hannah replied. I just want an honest one with you. They stood that way for a long moment, wrapped in each other's arms, the fire crackling beside them and the stars wheeling overhead. Hannah felt something shift inside her, fear giving way to something stronger. Hope. Whatever came next, whoever tried to stop them, she wouldn't face it alone. And that made all the difference. They reached the outskirts of Prescott the next afternoon, the territorial capital rising out of the ponderosa pine forests like a promise of civilization. It was larger than Yuma, more established, with proper streets and brick buildings that spoke of permanence and law. Kade insisted they scout the town before entering openly. So they left the horses hidden in a grove of trees and walked in on foot, staying to the less traveled streets. The town was busy, people going about their daily business, and Hannah felt her shoulders relax slightly. Surely in a place like this, with so many witnesses, Morris wouldn't dare try anything. They found Judge Harrison's office on a quiet side street, a modest building with a sign that read Territorial Court in plain letters. Kade paused at the corner, his eyes scanning the surrounding area. Looks clear, he said finally. But stay alert. If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. Understood, Hannah nodded, her hand instinctively moving to check that the documents were still safely tucked in her carpet bag. They were her proof, her only hope of justice, and she had guarded them obsessively throughout the journey. Judge Harrison's office was quiet when they entered, a small reception area with a desk where a young man sat writing in a ledger. He looked up as they entered, taking in their dusty trail clothes with raised eyebrows. Can I help you? He asked. We need to see Judge Harrison, Kade said. It's urgent. The judge is in court right now, hearing a land dispute case. He won't be available until later this afternoon. We'll wait, Kade said firmly. The young man shrugged and went back to his ledger. Kade and Hannah settled onto a hard wooden bench, the only seating in the small room. The wait stretched on, minutes turning into hours. Hannah's nerves stretched tighter with each passing moment. What if the judge refused to see them? What if he wouldn't listen? What if Jonathan's influence reached even here? Finally, as the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, the door opened and a man entered who could only be Judge Harrison. He was in his 50s, with silver threading through his dark hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He wore a suit that had seen better days, and he walked with a slight limp, favoring his left leg. Mr. Clemens, he said to the young man at the desk, any messages? No, sir. But these two have been waiting to see you. Say it's urgent. Judge Harrison turned his gaze to Kade and Hannah, assessing them with the same careful attention he probably gave to every case that came before him. All right, Come into my office." They followed him into a room lined with law books, a large desk dominating the center. The judge settled into his chair with a slight grimace, then gestured for them to sit. "Now then," he said. "What's this about?" Kade let Hannah tell her story, only occasionally adding details or clarifications. She laid out everything, from her mother's death to the forged will to her flight from Missouri and the hired guns that had pursued her. As she spoke, she pulled the documents from her carpetbag, setting them on the judge's desk with trembling hands. Judge Harrison listened without interrupting, his expression neutral. When Hannah finished, he picked up the documents and began to read them, his brow furrowing with concentration. The silence stretched out, broken only by the rustle of paper and the ticking of a clock on the wall. Finally, the judge set the papers down and looked at Hannah over his spectacles. "These are serious accusations, Miss Ellis. You're claiming that your stepfather forged your mother's will and has been using hired guns to track you across territories." "I'm not claiming it, sir. I'm stating it as fact. Those are the documents, both wills. You can see they're different, and I can testify that the one leaving everything to Jonathan is not the will my mother showed me before she died. The problem," Judge Harrison said slowly, "is that I have no jurisdiction in Missouri. This is an Arizona territorial court. I can't issue orders for arrests in another state." Hannah felt her heart sink. "So you can't help me." "I didn't say that," the judge replied. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "What I can do is examine this evidence, and if I find it credible, write a letter to the appropriate Missouri authorities recommending an investigation. I can also issue an order barring anyone from harassing or threatening you within the Arizona territory, which would give you legal protection if these hired guns come after you again while you're here." "That's something," Kade said. "It's more than she had before." "It's not enough to get justice for my mother," Hannah said, desperation creeping into her voice. "Jonathan will just wait me out, use his money and influence to bury any investigation. I'll spend the rest of my life looking over my shoulder, waiting for him to finish what he started." Judge Harrison sighed. "I understand your frustration, Miss Ellis. Truly I do. But the law has processes, procedures. They're not always fast and they're not always perfect, but they're what we have to protect us from chaos. If you want justice, you have to be willing to work within the system, even when it feels inadequate." "How long will the investigation take?" Hannah asked. "Months, possibly longer. These things are complicated, especially when dealing with influential people and across state lines." The judge paused. "But I'll tell you this. If your stepfather is guilty of forgery and possibly murder, if he's been using hired guns to terrorize you, then he's made mistakes. Men like that always do eventually. And when the law finally catches up to them, it doesn't matter how much money or influence they have. Justice finds a way." It wasn't the immediate solution Hannah had hoped for, but it was something. A start. She nodded slowly. "What do I need to do? Leave these documents with me." "I'll need to have them examined and authenticated. You'll need to write out a full statement detailing everything you've told me, which I'll forward to the Missouri authorities along with my recommendation. And you'll need to stay available for potential testimony, which means staying in the territory." "She can stay with me," Kade said suddenly. Both Hannah and the judge looked at him in surprise. "I mean, I'll make sure she has a safe place to stay, someone watching out for her while this plays out." Judge Harrison studied Kade with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "And you are Kade Emerson. I scout for the Army sometimes, do some bounty work. I was in Yuma when Miss Ellis was attacked by these hired guns. I helped her get away and brought her here. I see." The judge's gaze moved between them, and Hannah had the sense he was seeing more than they were saying. "Well, Mr. Emerson, I hope you're prepared for a long wait." The wheels of justice turned slowly. "I'll be here as long as it takes," Kade said, and when Hannah looked at him, she saw the certainty in his eyes. He meant it. Despite everything, despite the complications and the danger and the uncertainty, he was staying. They left the judge's office as the sun was setting, painting Prescott in shades of gold and amber. Hannah felt lighter somehow, despite the long road still ahead. She had taken the first step toward justice, had found someone who believed her story enough to act on it. And she had Kade, solid and steady beside her, his hand resting lightly at the small of her back as they walked. "We need to find a place to stay," Kade said. "Somewhere we can settle in for a while. There's a boarding house on the north side of town that I've used before. The landlady is discreet and doesn't ask questions." They collected the horses and rode through the town to a well-maintained house painted white with green shutters. A sign in the front yard read, "Rooms for rent, Mrs. Adelaide Porter, proprietress." Mrs. Porter turned out to be a tiny woman with white hair and a sharp, no-nonsense manner. She looked Kade and Hannah over with eyes that missed nothing. "2 rooms," Kade said. "Separate but close together if possible." "I have rooms available on the second floor," Mrs. Porter said. "Rent is payable weekly in advance. No drinking, no fighting, no entertaining visitors of ill repute. Breakfast is included, served at 7 sharp. Dinner is available for an extra fee." "That's fine," Kade said, pulling out a handful of coins. "We'll take both rooms and dinner." Mrs. Porter counted the money, then produced 2 keys. "Rooms 4 and 5, top of the stairs and to the right. There's fresh water in the pitchers and clean linens on the beds. You break anything, you pay for it." The rooms were small but clean, each containing a bed, a washstand, a chair, and a small wardrobe. Hannah's room had a window overlooking the back garden, and she stood there for a long moment after Mrs. Porter left, looking out at the flower beds and fruit trees, trying to process everything that had happened. A soft knock at her door announced Kade's presence. She opened it to find him leaning against the doorframe, his hat in his hands. "You all right?" he asked. "I don't know," Hannah admitted. "I feel like I should be relieved, but instead I just feel restless. Judge Harrison said months, Kade. How am I supposed to just wait that long, not knowing what's happening?" "The same way you've survived everything else," Kade said. "One day at a time. And you won't be waiting alone. I told you, I'm here for as long as it takes." "But what about your work? You said you scout for the Army, take bounty jobs. How are you going to support yourself while we're stuck here waiting?" Kade shrugged. "Fort Whipple is just a few miles from Prescott. I can talk to the commander there, see if they need scouts for local patrols. And there's always work for someone who can track and shoot. We'll manage, Hannah. I promise." Hannah wanted to believe him, wanted to let herself lean on his strength and certainty. But a lifetime of disappointment and betrayal made trust difficult, even with someone who had proven himself as thoroughly as Kade had. "What if I disappoint you?" she asked quietly. "What if, after all this, after everything you've done, I'm not worth it?" Kade stepped into the room, closing the door behind him for privacy. He set his hat on the chair and crossed to where Hannah stood, taking her hands in his. "Listen to me," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "You are worth it. You're worth every mile we rode, every risk we took. You're worth staying for, worth fighting for, and anyone who made you believe otherwise was lying to you and to themselves." Hannah felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm so tired of being afraid." "I know." Kade pulled her into his arms, and she went willingly, resting her head against his chest and listening to the steady beat of his heart. "But you don't have to be afraid alone anymore. We're in this together now, for better or worse." They stood that way for a long time, holding each other as the last light faded from the sky. When Kade finally pulled back, he brushed a strand of hair from Hannah's face with infinite gentleness. "Get some rest," he said. "Tomorrow we'll start figuring out our next steps, but tonight just rest. You're safe here." After he left, Hannah prepared for bed, washing the trail dust from her face and hands, changing into her nightgown. But despite her exhaustion, sleep was long in coming. Her mind kept turning over everything that had happened, the whirlwind of events that had brought her from a terrified girl hiding in a general store to a young woman taking the first steps toward justice. And through it all, constant and unwavering, was Kade. She thought about the way he had looked at her in the firelight, the way he had kissed her with such careful tenderness. She thought about his promise to stay, about the vulnerability in his eyes when he admitted he didn't want to leave. Hannah had loved her father, had loved her mother, but this feeling blooming in her chest was different. It was complicated by desire and need, and the heady rush of being seen truly by another person. She was falling in love with Kade Emerson, and the realization was both thrilling and terrifying. Because loving someone gave them the power to hurt you, and Hannah had been hurt enough for one lifetime. But as she finally drifted off to sleep, she decided that some risks were worth taking. Some people were worth trusting. And if she was going to rebuild her life from the ashes of what her stepfather had tried to destroy, she wanted Kade there, building it alongside her. The next weeks settled into a routine of sorts. Hannah wrote out her statement for Judge Harrison, reliving every painful detail of her mother's death and the subsequent theft of her inheritance. The judge sent letters to Missouri, beginning the slow process of investigation. Meanwhile, Kade found work scouting for the Army, riding out on short patrols and coming back with stories of the land and the people who lived on it. They fell into an easy companionship, eating meals together at Mrs. Porter's table, walking through Prescott in the evenings as the heat of the day faded. Kade taught Hannah to shoot, taking her outside of town where they could practice without attracting attention. She proved to be a natural, her hand steady and her eye keen. "You're better than most men I've trained," Kade said one afternoon, watching as Hannah hit the target they had set up against a hillside. "You've got the temperament for it, calm under pressure." "Maybe because I've had to be," Hannah said, lowering the gun. "When you grow up afraid, you learn to stay calm on the outside even when you're screaming inside." "You don't have to be that person anymore," Kade said gently. "You don't have to always be strong, always be calm. You're allowed to fall apart sometimes." "Not yet," Hannah said. "Maybe when this is all over, when Jonathan is finally behind bars and I can stop looking over my shoulder, then maybe I'll let myself fall apart. But not yet." As the days turned into weeks, Hannah and Kade grew closer, their connection deepening from the initial crisis bond into something more substantial. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their futures, fears they had never voiced to anyone else. Kade told her about growing up on a ranch in Texas, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the day his parents died in a cholera outbreak, and he and Sarah had been sent to live with an aunt who resented their presence. He told her about joining the Army at 16, lying about his age, desperate to escape and make something of himself. He told her about the years of scouting, the beauty and brutality of the frontier, the men he had killed in the line of duty, and the weight those deaths carried. Hannah told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her father's gentleness and her mother's strength, about the way Jonathan Ellis had poisoned everything good in her life. She told him about the nights she had lain awake planning her escape, about the fear that had dogged every step of her journey west. She told him about the guilt she carried for leaving her mother's grave behind, for running when maybe she should have stayed and fought. You did the only thing you could do, Kade assured her. Staying would have meant death or a fate worse than death. Your mother would have wanted you to live, Hannah. She would have wanted you to be free. On a warm evening in July, nearly a month after their arrival in Prescott, Kade and Hannah walked to the edge of town where the ponderosa pines grew thick, and the sounds of civilization faded into the whisper of wind through branches. They found a fallen log and sat, watching the sun set behind the mountains in a riot of purple and gold. "I got a letter from Daniel Kershaw today," Kade said, breaking the comfortable silence. "He says that Morris and his men came by the ranch about a week after we left, asking questions. Daniel told them he hadn't seen us and they eventually moved on. They're still looking," Hannah said, her stomach knotting with anxiety. "But they don't know where we are, and Judge Harrison's order means that if they try anything here, they'll be arrested. You're safer now than you've been in a long time. I know. I just wish it was over. I wish I could know for certain that Jonathan will face justice, that I can stop running and start living." Kade took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "You're already living, Hannah. Every day you wake up and make choices. That's living. Every moment you laugh or learn something new or just breathe in the fresh air, that's living. Don't let waiting for justice steal your present." Hannah looked at their joined hands, at the way Kade's fingers engulfed hers, strong and protective. "You've given me so much," she said softly. "Not just protection and help, but hope. A reason to believe that the future can be different from the past. I don't know how to thank you for that." "You don't need to thank me," Kade said. He shifted on the log, turning to face her more fully. "Hannah, these past weeks with you have meant more to me than you probably realize. When Sarah died, I thought I had lost the ability to care about anything or anyone. I was just going through the motions, existing but not really alive. Then I met you and something changed. You reminded me that life is worth fighting for, that there's still good in the world worth protecting." "Kade," Hannah whispered, her heart hammering in her chest. "I'm in love with you," Kade said, the words tumbling out in a rush as though he had been holding them back for too long. "I know it's too soon. I know the timing is terrible, but I can't keep pretending I don't feel this way. I love you, Hannah Ellis. Your courage, your kindness, your stubborn refusal to give up even when everything seems hopeless. I love all of it, all of you." Hannah felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but for the first time in as long as she could remember, they were tears of joy rather than sorrow. "I love you too," she said, her voice shaking with the weight of the admission. "I've been falling in love with you since that first day in Yuma when you stood up for me against those men. Maybe before that, maybe in that moment when you crouched down beside me and told me to breathe. I love you, Kade Emerson, and I don't want to imagine my future without you in it." Kade cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "Then you don't have to imagine it. I'm here, Hannah. I'm staying. Not just until your case is resolved, but after. Forever if you'll have me." "Forever sounds perfect," Hannah said. And then his lips were on hers, and she was kissing him back with all the pent-up emotion of the past weeks, all the fear and hope and desperate longing she had been carrying. This kiss was different from their first, deeper and more certain. It was a promise and a claiming all at once, a declaration that whatever came next, they would face it together. Kade's arms wrapped around her, pulling her close, and Hannah melted into his embrace, feeling safer and more cherished than she had since her father's death. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, and it wasn't quite a question, more of a plea. "I know we haven't known each other long. I know there are still obstacles to overcome, but marry me anyway. Build a life with me. Let me love you the way you deserve to be loved." "Yes," Hannah said without hesitation. "Yes, 1,000 times yes. They sat on that fallen log as the stars came out, holding each other and talking about the future they would build together. Kade spoke of finding a piece of land, building a home, maybe raising horses like he had as a child in Texas. Hannah talked about wanting a garden, about wanting children someday, about creating the kind of warm, loving family she had lost when her father died. "We'll have all of that," Kade promised. "Every bit of it. A home, a family, a future. I'll spend every day of my life making sure you're happy and safe and loved." "I believe you," Hannah said, and she did. Against all odds, against the cynicism that loss and betrayal had bred in her, she believed in Kade Emerson and the future he promised. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the courthouse, Judge Harrison presiding with a knowing smile. Daniel and Martha Kershaw made the journey to Prescott to stand as witnesses, bringing their children and enough supplies for a celebration that filled Mrs. Porter's dining room with laughter and joy. Hannah wore a new dress, pale blue cotton that Martha had helped her sew, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Kade wore his best clothes, his hair neatly trimmed, his eyes never leaving Hannah's face as they spoke their vows. "I, Kade Alexander Emerson, take you, Hannah Marie Ellis, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, protect you, stand by you through whatever comes. In sickness and health, in plenty and want, from this day forward until death parts us. I, Hannah Marie Ellis, take you, Kade Alexander Emerson, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, support you, trust in you through all our days. In joy and sorrow, in ease and hardship, from this day forward until death parts us." Judge Harrison pronounced them married, and when Kade kissed his new wife, the small group gathered in the courthouse erupted in applause. Hannah felt happiness burst through her like sunlight breaking through clouds, bright and warm and almost painfully intense. The celebration that evening was joyful and bittersweet all at once. Hannah found herself alternating between laughter and tears, overwhelmed by the kindness of these people who had become her makeshift family. Mrs. Porter had outdone herself with the food, and even her stern demeanor cracked enough to offer the newlyweds her congratulations. As the evening wound down and the Kershaws prepared to return to their ranch, Martha pulled Hannah aside for a quiet word. "You found a good man in Kade," she said, squeezing Hannah's hands. "Hold on to him and let him hold on to you. Life on the frontier is hard and there will be challenges ahead. But if you face them together with love and trust, you'll come through all right." "Thank you," Hannah said, embracing the older woman, "for everything. For welcoming me, for standing witness at my wedding, for treating me like family when I had none." "You'll always have family in us," Martha promised. "And when you and Kade finally settle somewhere, you come visit with those future children of yours. My little ones could use some cousins to play with." That night, in the room that was now officially theirs, Hannah and Kade came together as husband and wife. Their lovemaking was tender and passionate in equal measure, a physical expression of all the emotion they had been building toward since that day in Yuma. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the narrow bed, skin against skin, hearts beating in sync. "I love you, Mrs. Emerson," Kade murmured against Hannah's hair. "I love you too, Mr. Emerson," Hannah replied, and she had never meant anything more in her life. The weeks following their marriage were some of the happiest of Hannah's life, despite the shadow of her stepfather's crimes still hanging over them. Word finally came from Missouri in late August, a letter addressed to Judge Harrison and forwarded to the newlyweds. Hannah's hands shook as she opened the envelope, Kade reading over her shoulder. The letter was from a Missouri prosecutor, informing them that based on Judge Harrison's recommendation and the evidence Hannah had provided, An investigation into Jonathan Ellis had been opened. The prosecutor went on to say that during the course of that investigation, they had discovered irregularities in the death of Hannah's mother, including testimony from the doctor that Jonathan had pressured him to increase dosages of dangerous medication. Jonathan Ellis had been arrested and charged with forgery, theft, and suspected murder. Hannah read the letter 3 times, each time feeling like she must be dreaming. It had happened. Justice was actually happening. "He's been arrested," she whispered. "Kade, he's actually been arrested." "It's over," Kade said, pulling her into his arms. "Or at least it's beginning to be over. He'll stand trial, and with the evidence you provided and the doctor's testimony, they'll convict him." "And I'm free," Hannah said, the realization washing over her. "For the first time in over a year, I'm actually free." She collapsed against Kade, sobbing with relief and grief and joy all mixed together. He held her through it, stroking her hair, murmuring soothing words. When the storm of emotion finally passed, Hannah felt lighter, as though a weight she had been carrying for so long had finally been lifted. More letters came over the following months, keeping them apprised of the legal proceedings in Missouri. Charles Hammond, faced with the collapse of his arrangement with Jonathan, had fled the state and was wanted for questioning. Other victims of Jonathan's business dealings had come forward, adding their voices to the case against him. The trial, when it happened, was swift and decisive. Jonathan Ellis was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 20 years in prison. Hannah's inheritance was restored to her, a considerable sum that included the value of her mother's estate, plus restitution for the money Jonathan had stolen. But more valuable than the money was the vindication. The knowledge that her mother's death had not gone unavenged, that Jonathan would spend the rest of his life paying for his crimes. With the legal matters finally settled, Kade and Hannah began to seriously plan their future. They used a portion of Hannah's inheritance to purchase land north of Prescott, a beautiful valley with a stream running through it, and enough good grazing land for the horse ranch Kade dreamed of starting. They built their house together, working alongside hired laborers during the day and collapsing exhausted into each other's arms at night. It was hard work, harder than anything Hannah had done before, but it was also deeply satisfying. She was building something lasting, something that belonged to her and Kade, something that no one could take away. The house, when completed, was simple but sturdy. 2 stories with a wide porch wrapping around the front and sides. Hannah planted a garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the Arizona soil. Kade brought home horses, starting with just a few mares and a good stallion, building his herd slowly and carefully. Their first winter in the new house was harsh, with snow piling high and temperatures dropping below freezing. But inside, with a fire roaring in the fireplace and Kade's arms around her, Hannah felt nothing but warmth. They played cards and read books and talked about everything and nothing. And on a particularly cold January night, Hannah realized that her monthly courses were late, and she began to suspect that their family was about to grow. She told Kade on a bright February morning, the words tumbling out over breakfast. He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, and Hannah felt a flutter of worry. But then a smile broke across his face, wide and genuine, and filled with such joy that Hannah found herself laughing through happy tears. "We're going to have a baby," Kade said wonderingly, as though he couldn't quite believe it. Then, louder, "We're going to have a baby." He swept Hannah up in his arms, spinning her around the kitchen despite her laughing protests. When he finally set her down, he cupped her still flat belly with reverent hands. "Hello in there," he said to the child they had created. "This is your father speaking. I want you to know that you are already so loved, so wanted." Your mother and I are going to give you the best life we can, full of love and laughter and wide open spaces. We can't wait to meet you." Hannah felt tears streaming down her face again, but they were the good kind, the kind that came from overwhelming happiness. "I love you," she told Kade. "I love you so much it scares me sometimes." "Don't be scared," Kade said, pulling her close. "We've survived everything else. We'll survive this too, together." Their son was born in early September of 1882, arriving in the world with a lusty cry that announced his presence to everyone within earshot. They named him Samuel, after Hannah's father, and from the moment Hannah held him in her arms, she understood a depth of love she had never imagined possible. Kade was a devoted father, doting on Samuel with the same fierce protectiveness he had shown Hannah. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved wooden toys, walked the floor countless nights when Samuel was fussy. Watching her husband with their son, Hannah felt her heart expand in ways she hadn't known were possible. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were seasons of drought that tested their resources, winters that were brutally cold, the constant hard work of running a ranch. But through it all, Hannah and Kade faced each obstacle as a team, their love for each other and their growing family sustaining them through the difficult times. More children followed Samuel. A daughter they named Sarah Grace, in honor of Kade's lost sister, who had her father's gray eyes and her mother's stubborn determination. Then twin boys, Matthew and Michael, who kept their parents running from the moment they learned to walk. Each child was loved and welcomed. Each added their own unique joy to the family. Hannah maintained a correspondence with Judge Harrison, who had retired from the bench but remained a friend. She learned through him that Jonathan Ellis had died in prison in the spring of 1885, felled by pneumonia at the age of 53. Hannah felt no joy at his death, but she did feel a sense of closure, a final ending to that chapter of her life. The Emerson Ranch prospered over the years, becoming known throughout the territory for the quality of its horses. Kade's reputation as a scout and his skill with animals brought them a steady stream of customers, and Hannah proved to have a head for business, managing their accounts and investments with a skill that impressed even the bankers in Prescott. They made regular visits to the Kershaw Ranch, their children growing up alongside Daniel and Martha's brood. The two families formed a bond that went deeper than friendship, becoming the kind of chosen family that frontier life often created. When the Kershaws faced hardship, the Emersons were there to help. When illness struck the Emerson household, the Kershaws arrived with food and medicine and willing hands. Mrs. Adelaide Porter remained a fixture in their lives, eventually selling her boarding house and moving to a small cottage on the Emerson property. She became the children's beloved Aunt Adelaide, telling them stories of the early days of Prescott and maintaining her sharp tongue and sharper wit well into her 70s. As Arizona moved toward statehood, as the wild frontier gradually gave way to civilization, Kade and Hannah built a legacy that extended far beyond their own family. They were known throughout the territory as fair employers, good neighbors, and generous supporters of the growing community. When the town of Emerson Springs was established near their ranch in 1893, named in honor of the couple who had done so much to help settle the region, Hannah and Kade attended the dedication ceremony with their 4 children and felt a profound sense of accomplishment. On a warm evening in June of 1901, 20 years to the day after Kade had first walked into that general store in Yuma and changed both their lives forever, Hannah and Kade sat together on the porch of their home. Their children were grown now, Samuel working the ranch alongside his father, Sarah Grace married to a good man and expecting her first child, the twins off at university in California, preparing to become lawyers. You ever think about that day? Hannah asked, her hand finding Kade's as naturally as breathing after 2 decades together. The day we met, all the time, Kade admitted. His hair was silver now, his face more weathered, but his eyes still held that same steady strength that had drawn Hannah from the first. I think about the girl hiding behind the counter, so scared but so brave. I think about how close I came to just walking past that store, minding my own business. I'm glad you didn't, Hannah said softly. I'm glad you stopped, glad you helped, glad you stayed. So am I. Kade raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles with the same tender reverence he had shown on their wedding day. You know what you told me once, that first night we camped on the way to Prescott. You said you were afraid all the time, that you didn't feel brave. I remember. I told you then that you were braver than you knew. Do you believe me now? Hannah thought about everything they had survived, everything they had built. She thought about the terrified 18-year-old girl she had been and the woman she had become, strong and confident and loved. She thought about her mother, whose death had nearly destroyed her but whose memory had ultimately led her to this life, this family, this happiness. Yes, she said finally. I believe you. I was braver than I knew and you helped me see that. You helped me become who I was always meant to be. We helped each other, Kade corrected. You saved me just as much as I saved you, Hannah. Maybe more. You gave me a reason to live again, a future to believe in. You gave me this family, this life. Everything good I have came from that day. I walked into that store and saw a young woman who needed help. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and purple. From inside the house, they could hear Samuel talking to his mother about plans for expanding the horse breeding program. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled and one of the ranch dogs answered with a bark. You have any regrets? Hannah asked. Anything you would change if you could? Kade was quiet for a moment, considering. I wish I could have saved Sarah. I wish I could have been there for her the way I was there for you. But I've learned that we can't change the past, only accept it and try to do better going forward. Everything else, every choice I've made since that day in Yuma, I would make the same way again. This life we built, this family, our love, I wouldn't trade any of it for anything in the world. Neither would I, Hannah said, and she meant it with every fiber of her being. She had lost so much in her young life, had survived horrors that might have broken a less determined person. But she had also gained everything that truly mattered: love, family, purpose, and the kind of deep contentment that came from knowing you were exactly where you were meant to be. As the stars began to emerge in the darkening sky, Hannah leaned her head against Kade's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. They had weathered storms together, both literal and metaphorical. They had raised children and built a business and created a community. They had loved each other through joy and sorrow, through easy times and hard. And through it all, from that first moment in a dusty general store in Yuma to this perfect evening 20 years later, one truth had remained constant. Hannah Emerson was braver than she knew, and Kade Emerson would spend the rest of his life making sure she never forgot it. Their story, which had begun with fear and danger, had transformed into something beautiful and lasting. It was a testament to the power of courage in the face of adversity, to the importance of standing up for what was right even when it was dangerous, and most of all, to the transformative power of love. Years later, when their grandchildren would ask them to tell the story of how they met, Hannah and Kade would sit together just as they did on that porch, hands intertwined, and share the tale of a frightened young woman and a grieving cowboy who found each other when they needed it most. They would talk about justice and courage, and the long, hard road to building a life worth living. And they would tell their grandchildren that sometimes the best things in life come from the worst circumstances, that love can bloom even in the darkest moments, and that being brave doesn't mean never being afraid, it means pushing forward despite the fear. Hannah and Kade Emerson lived long, full lives, surrounded by children and grandchildren, and eventually great-grandchildren. They worked their ranch until their bodies could no longer keep pace with their spirits, then passed it on to Samuel and his family, confident that the legacy they had built would continue for generations to come. When Kade finally passed away in the winter of 1918 at the age of 63, Hannah was holding his hand, just as she had held it through all the years of their marriage. His last words were of love for her, and his last expression was one of perfect peace. Hannah followed him 3 years later, in the spring of 1921. She was 60 years old, and she had lived to see Arizona become a state, to see her family grow and prosper, to see justice prevail over corruption and love triumph over fear. Her children and grandchildren surrounded her bed as she took her last breaths, and her final words were simple. I was braver than I knew, and she was. They both were. Two souls who had found each other in the worst of circumstances and built something extraordinary from the ashes of their pain. Their love story became legend in the territory, passed down through generations as an example of what was possible when courage and compassion joined forces. The ranch they built continued to thrive, becoming one of the premier horse breeding operations in the newly formed state of Arizona. The town of Emerson Springs grew into a thriving community, with schools and churches and businesses that bore the mark of Hannah and Kade's influence. Their children and grandchildren scattered across the West, carrying with them the values of hard work, integrity, and fierce love that their parents and grandparents had embodied. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the sun sets over the mountains in just the right way, locals swear they can see two figures sitting on the porch of the old Emerson house, hands intertwined, looking out over the land they loved so well. It's just a story, of course, a romantic notion that the townspeople like to share with visitors. But perhaps, in a way that transcends the physical world, Hannah and Kade Emerson are still there, still together, still standing watch over the family and community they worked so hard to build. Their love was strong enough to overcome every obstacle life threw at them. Why should death be any different? Their story, which began with a bullet shattering glass in a dusty Arizona town, and a cowboy's simple act of intervention, ended not with fear but with fulfillment, not with running but with roots that went deep into the red earth of the territory they called home. It was a story of transformation and redemption, of two damaged souls healing each other, of love proving stronger than hate, courage outlasting fear, and justice, though delayed, ultimately prevailing. Hannah Ellis had started her journey as a frightened, hunted girl with nothing but a carpetbag and a prayer. She ended it as Hannah Emerson, matriarch of a thriving family, respected member of her community, and living proof that sometimes, when you're at your lowest point, the universe sends you exactly what you need in the form of a gray-eyed cowboy who sees your worth when you can't see it yourself. And Kade Emerson, who had begun as a guilt-ridden drifter trying to outrun his past, found in Hannah not just redemption but purpose, not just love but a reason to believe in the goodness of the world again. Together, they proved that the best love stories aren't about perfect people in perfect circumstances, but about flawed, hurting people who choose to build something beautiful together despite the odds. Their legacy lived on in every horse bred on the Emerson ranch, in every citizen of the town that bore their name, in every child and grandchild who carried their blood and their values into the future. But most of all, their legacy lived in the story itself, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply keep going, one step at a time, trusting that somewhere ahead, the path will lead to something better. In the end, that's exactly what happened for Hannah and Kade. The path that began in fear led them to love. The journey that started with running ended with home. And the voices that shook with terror learned to speak with confidence, to laugh with joy, and to whisper words of love that echoed through generations. They were braver than they knew, and they built something that would outlast them, both a family, a legacy, and a love story for the ages.